In the forgotten depths beneath Coruscant, where even starlight cannot reach, something clawed its way into existence that should not be. A warrior forged in hellfire, returned from death with power the Force cannot touch or name. The Empire calls him an abomination. The desperate call him salvation. But when a soul bound to damnation stands against the galaxy's most ruthless regime, protecting the broken and the forgotten with chains born from darkness itself, one question burns through every level of the city planet. Can redemption ever belong to those who've already been condemned? The underlevels of Coruscant had not seen natural light in 1,000 years. Here, beneath the glittering spires where senators debated and stormtroopers marched in perfect formation, the galaxy's heart rotted from within. Neon signs flickered in languages dead before the Republic fell, casting crimson and violet shadows across durasteel canyons that plunged into darkness so absolute it seemed to swallow sound itself. The air tasted of rust and desperation, thick with the exhalations of 20 billion souls stacked upon the bones of civilizations older than memory. And on this night, in a forgotten transit nexus where the homeless and the hunted made their beds among corroded pipes, reality tore open like a wound. The anomaly began as a distortion, a shimmer in the fabric of space that made the eyes water and the mind recoil. Then came the smell, sulfur and charred flesh, and something else. Something that had no place in this galaxy or any other. The Force itself seemed to flinch, rippling outward from the epicenter in waves that made every Force sensitive within 100 levels clutch their heads in sudden, blinding agony. A scream that was not a scream echoed through dimensions that should not touch, and then he was there. Spawn materialized in a cascade of emerald hellfire, his form coalescing from smoke and shadow and fury made manifest. The necroplasmic symbiote that comprised his being writhed across his massive frame, living chains and tattered cape flowing as if submerged in water that existed only for them. His eyes burned like coals in the skull-white mask that covered his face, and when he moved, reality seemed to lag behind him, unable to fully accept his presence. The concrete beneath his boots blackened and cracked, frost spreading outward in defiance of the humid heat. He stood alone in the transit nexus, surrounded by the terrified faces of those who had nowhere else to run. A Rhodian clutching his children, a human woman with cybernetic eyes that had gone dark years ago, an elderly Ithorian who had seen the Clone Wars and thought he understood what horror looked like. They were wrong. Spawn's cape billowed without wind, and the necroplasm responded to his confusion, his rage, his absolute certainty that hell itself had found new ways to torture him. This was not New York. This was not even Earth. The architecture was wrong, the gravity felt different, and when he reached for the familiar anger that powered his war against evil, he found something else waiting, something vast and incomprehensible that touched every living thing and recoiled from him like he was poison. Where am I? The words emerged as a rasp, layered with harmonics that should not exist in human speech. No one answered. They could only stare at the thing that had invaded their world, and in their eyes, Spawn saw the same fear he had grown accustomed to, the same revulsion that greeted him in every alley, every rooftop, every moment of his cursed existence. The Force screamed in languages older than the Jedi. 20 levels above, in a chamber lined with obsidian and illuminated by crimson holocron projectors, an inquisitor named Varesh felt the disturbance like a blade between her ribs. She was Poan, her species' natural connection to the dark side amplified by years of brutal training under Vader's merciless tutelage. But this sensation was nothing she had been prepared for. It was not the dark side, though it carried darkness within it. It was not the light, though something in its core burned with terrible purpose. It was other, and in the Sith philosophy, otherness was heresy. "My lord," she whispered into the comm embedded in her collar, "we have a situation in subsector 773. There has been a Force manifestation of unprecedented nature." The response came in the mechanical breathing that had terrified systems from the core to the rim. "Describe it." Varesh closed her yellow eyes, extending her perception downward through the layers of Coruscant's endless sprawl. What she found made her blood crystallize in her veins. It is a presence. Not human, though it wears human shape. It radiates death and rage, but beneath that, something else. Pain. Terrible, infinite pain. And guilt. She paused, searching for words to describe the impossible. It feels like damnation made flesh, my lord, like something that should not exist is defying its own impossibility. The breathing continued for 3 long cycles. Then, deploy purge troopers, contain the anomaly, I will inform the Emperor. The connection severed, leaving Varesh alone with the crawling horror that something new had entered a galaxy that thought it had catalogued every manifestation of power. She gathered her black robes and activated her double-bladed spinning lightsaber, the crimson blades casting her gaunt face in the color of fresh blood. Whatever had manifested below, it would learn that the Empire tolerated no aberrations. The hunt had begun. In another part of Coruscant, far beneath even the level where Spawn had materialized, something ancient stirred. The Temple of the Wills had stood here long before the Jedi built their grand structure kilometers above. Before the Republic even had a name, its stones were older than hyperdrive technology, inscribed with symbols that predated BASIC itself, and within its deepest vault, sealed behind doors that had not opened in 5,000 years, a holocron that should not exist pulsed with sudden, terrible awareness. The holocron had been created by Jocasta Nu in the desperate days after Order 66, when the chief librarian of the Jedi Temple realized that death was inevitable but knowledge could be preserved. She had poured everything into it, every scrap of lore the Jedi had accumulated across millennia, every warning, every prophecy, every failed attempt to understand the Force in its totality. And she had included something the Council would have forbidden, records of phenomena that defied the light-dark dichotomy, beings and powers that existed in the spaces between. Now, as Spawn's presence rippled through the Force like a stone through still water, the holocron activated without prompting. Jocasta Nu's spectral form materialized in the abandoned temple, her aged features rendered in crystalline blue light, and she spoke to the darkness with a librarian's precision. Unknown entity detected. Classification. Pending. Force signature. Null. Necromantic signature. Extreme. Recommendation. Observe and document. This is not Sith. This is not Jedi. This is something the archives never predicted. Her image flickered, processing data through algorithms designed to categorize the infinite. Warning. The entity demonstrates signs of autonomous moral agency despite necromantic corruption. Hypothesis. A soul bound to death but not surrendered to it. Further study required. Danger level. Catastrophic. The holocron pulsed once, then fell silent, waiting for someone to find it, someone to understand what it meant that a being of pure damnation could still choose. But there was no one left to listen. Spawn moved through the underlevels like a wraith, his cape flowing behind him in defiance of physics, reaching and grasping with semi-sentient hunger. The necroplasm was agitated, confused by the absence of the hellspawn energy it fed upon, searching for familiar sources of power and finding only this strange, omnipresent field that permeated everything. The symbiote tasted the Force and found it neither food nor enemy, merely alien, and in its confusion, it pulled tighter around its host, protective and predatory in equal measure. The streets here were carved from the foundations of buildings so old their original purpose had been forgotten. Moisture dripped from pipes that fed levels above, pooling in streets where the desperate drank without caring what toxins it carried. Holographic advertisements glitched and stuttered, selling dreams to people who had long since stopped believing in them. And everywhere, the eyes watched, suspicious and afraid, because survival in the underlevels meant recognizing threats before they killed you. Spawn was a threat like none they had ever seen. He passed a group of refugees huddled around a burning barrel, their faces painted orange by the flames. They scattered at his approach, leaving behind their meager possessions, and he felt the familiar ache of recognition. He had been a protector once, before his murder, before his damnation. Al Simmons had fought for his country, and Spawn had fought for the innocent, and neither had ever been enough. Now here, in this impossible place, he saw the same suffering he had witnessed in Rat City, the same exploitation, the same crushing weight of systems designed to grind the weak into dust. Some things, it seemed, were universal. You there, the thing in the mask. Spawn turned, his reflexes faster than thought, and found himself facing a Twi'lek woman who had not run. She was thin, her violet skin marked with the scars of a hard life, but her eyes held the defiance of someone who had survived by being smarter than those who hunted her. One hand rested on a blaster that had seen better decades, but she had not drawn it. "You're not from here," she continued, her basic accented with the musical tones of real. "Not from Coruscant, not from the underlevels, not from anywhere I've ever heard of. But you're angry. I can see it, feel it almost. The whole level can feel it." She tilted her head, studying him with the intensity of someone reading a predator's intentions. "So what are you going to do with all that rage?" Spawn's cape settled around him like folded wings. "Where am I? Coruscant, capital of the Galactic Empire, center of everything and cesspool of nothing." She gestured around at the decay. "You're in the lower levels, the place the Emperor pretends doesn't exist while he builds his war machine on our backs. And from the way reality bent when you showed up, I'm guessing you didn't arrive by shuttle." "The Empire," Spawn repeated, and something in his voice made the Twi'lek take a step back despite her courage. He had fought empires before, organizations that valued power over people, systems that treated human life as currency. The name was different, but the sickness was the same. How many worlds does this empire control? Thousands, tens of thousands, maybe more. It's hard to keep count when they're conquering new ones and burning others. She studied him with renewed intensity. "You really don't know, do you? You're not a spy or an insurgent, you're just—" "I'm dead," Spawn corrected, and the simple statement carried the weight of absolute truth. "I've been dead for years, and wherever I am now, it's just another level of hell." Before the Twi'lek could respond, the screaming started. It came from the east, a cacophony of blaster fire and terror that echoed through the Durasteel canyons. Spawn moved without thinking, his body propelled by instincts carved into him through countless battles, and his cape spread wide, catching the air and lifting him upward in a burst of necroplasmic power. He soared over the crowd that was fleeing toward him, and what he saw on the other side made the hellfire in his eyes burn brighter. Stormtroopers. Dozens of them, their white armor pristine against the grime of the underlevels, methodically advancing through the streets with weapons raised. But these were not standard troops. Their armor was heavier, reinforced with additional plating, and they moved with a precision that spoke of enhancement, of training beyond the ordinary. Purge troopers, though Spawn did not know the name, soldiers designed to hunt force-sensitive targets that regular infantry could not handle. And they were gunning down everyone in their path. A mother clutching an infant fell, the blue stun bolt catching her in the back. A dug mechanic who had been trying to close the blast doors to his shop crumpled, electricity arcing across his body. The troopers were not trying to kill, not yet. They were corralling, herding, driving the population toward a kill zone where something worse waited. Spawn descended like a meteor of green hellfire and living shadow. The necroplasm lashed out before he even landed, his cape transforming into a dozen barbed tendrils that wrapped around the nearest trooper and lifted him screaming into the air. The symbiote fed on fear and pain, and it found both in abundance, squeezing until armor cracked and bones snapped. Spawn hit the ground in a crouch that shattered the permacrete, and chaos erupted around him. Blaster bolts converged on his position, red lances of superheated plasma that would have reduced a human to ash. Spawn's cape snapped around him, forming a shield that absorbed the impacts with contemptuous ease, each bolt dissipating against the necroplasmic barrier like rain against stone. He moved forward, each step deliberate, and the living costume responded to his will, reaching and striking and crushing with autonomous hunger. A trooper raised a flamethrower, liquid fire gushing forth in a stream hot enough to melt Durasteel. Spawn walked through it, the flames parting around him like water around a stone, and grabbed the trooper by the helmet. The necroplasm flowed across the white plastoid, corrupt and corroding, and when Spawn released him, the soldier collapsed, his nervous system overloaded by contact with something his body could not comprehend. "Stand down," a voice commanded through external speakers. "By order of the Imperial Inquisitorius, you are ordered to surrender for immediate processing." Spawn looked up and saw Varesh standing atop a transport, her double-bladed lightsaber spinning in a crimson wheel of death, the dark side radiating from her like heat from a forge. She was tall and terrible, her Pauan features rendered demonic by the red glow, and when she looked at Spawn, he saw recognition in her yellow eyes, the knowledge of power when it gazed upon power. "You are an abomination," she declared, her voice carrying across the battlefield with force-enhanced projection, "a corruption that does not belong in this galaxy. The Emperor will study you, dissect you, and learn whatever secrets your existence holds. Or you will be destroyed. Choose." Spawn's response was not words but action. His gloved hand rose, and the necroplasm responded, green chains erupting from his palm and lashing across the distance. Varesh leaped, her lightsaber cutting through the chains with precise strikes, each impact sending sparks of impossible color cascading through the air. She landed in front of him, her weapon held in a guard position, and for a moment, Predator and Predator regarded each other. "You do not touch the Force," she observed, circling slowly. "And yet you command power. How is this possible?" "I don't explain myself to fascists," Spawn growled and lunged. The battle that followed was unlike anything the underlevels had ever witnessed. Varesh moved with the enhanced speed and prescience of a trained inquisitor, her lightsaber a blur of strikes aimed at joints and weak points, probing for vulnerabilities with surgical precision. But Spawn was faster, his reflexes honed by years of combat against demons and angels and everything in between, and the necroplasm gave him options no Jedi or Sith had ever faced. His cape became a swarm of bladed tendrils, forcing Varesh to divert her attention, her lightsaber spinning in defensive patterns. Spawn pressed the advantage, closing the distance, his gauntleted fist swinging in a haymaker that would have shattered bone. Varesh ducked, the Force warning her a microsecond before impact, and drove her lightsaber up toward his exposed ribs. The blade struck necroplasm and recoiled, the exotic matter of the lightsaber meeting the hell-forged substance of Spawn's costume in a shower of sparks. The symbiote shrieked, wounded but not destroyed, and Varesh stumbled back in shock. Nothing survived a lightsaber strike. Nothing could resist the contained plasma blade. "What are you?" she breathed, and for the first time, fear crept into her voice. Spawn gave her no answer, only fury. His chains lashed out, dozens of them, a storm of necroplasmic bondage that wrapped around the Inquisitor's limbs and began to pull. Varesh screamed, the dark side surging through her, empowering her muscles beyond their natural limits. She pulled back, her lightsaber carving through chain after chain, but for every one she severed, 3 more took its place. The Force howled around her, and she channeled it into pure kinetic destruction, a wave of crushing power that radiated outward in all directions. Buildings cracked, speeders were flattened. Civilians still too close to the battle were hurled through the air like leaves in a storm. Spawn stood unmoved, rooted to the ground by his own terrible mass, and walked forward into the telekinetic hurricane. Each step was agony, resistance like wading through concrete, but he had endured the fires of hell itself. A Force push was nothing compared to that. He reached Varesh and grabbed her throat, lifting her from the ground as the chains wrapped tighter, and in that moment of contact, something terrible happened. The necroplasm touched her directly, skin to skin despite her robes, and it felt the darkness within her, tasted the years of suffering and cruelty and self-justification. The symbiote fed on sin, and it found a feast. Varesh's screams took on a different quality, horror mixed with agony, as every act she had committed, every torture she had inflicted, every innocent she had helped murder flashed through her mind in excruciating detail. The necroplasm showed her herself, reflected through the lens of her victim's pain, and she could not look away. Spawn released her, and she collapsed, trembling, her lightsaber deactivating as it fell from nerveless fingers. Around them, the remaining purge troopers had ceased fire, uncertain, their rigid training providing no protocol for this scenario. Their target had defeated an Inquisitor in single combat, had walked through weapons designed to kill Jedi, had demonstrated abilities that should not exist. "Leave," Spawn commanded, his voice echoing through the street. "All of you. Tell your Emperor that this level is under my protection now. Anyone who preys on the weak down here answers to me." He turned his back on them, a gesture of dismissal so profound it bordered on contempt, and began walking deeper into the underlevels. Behind him, the stormtroopers began the slow process of retreat, dragging their wounded and their shattered Inquisitor with them. They had been bred and conditioned for obedience, but even conditioning had its limits, and what they had witnessed went beyond their capacity to process. The Twi'lek woman who had first spoken to Spawn emerged from cover, her expression caught between terror and awe. "You just made an enemy of the entire Empire." Spawn did not turn. "I've made worse." The cape billowed, and he vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only scorch marks and the lingering smell of sulfur. The news of the encounter reached the Imperial Palace within the hour, transmitted through encrypted channels that bypass standard Imperial communications. In his meditation chamber, Darth Vader received the report through his armor's integrated systems, the mechanical breathing that sustained his ruined body never faltering as he processed the information. The Force carried echoes of the battle, and what he sensed disturbed him more than he would ever admit. This creature, this Spawn, did not register in the Force. It was not void like the Yuuzhan Vong of ancient records, not absent like the Ysalamiri of Merkur. It existed, had mass and presence, but the Force flowed around it as if encountering something that did not belong to the natural order. And yet it had power, undeniable and terrible power that had broken an Inquisitor and scattered Imperial troops. "Intriguing," came a voice like poisoned honey, and Vader turned to find the Emperor's holographic form materializing behind him. Palpatine's scarred features were alive with interest, yellow eyes glittering with malevolent curiosity, a being of pure death that yet acts with purpose. "Tell me, Lord Vader, what does the Force reveal?" "Nothing, my master." Vader's mechanical voice carried no inflection, but beneath the emotionless synthesis, something stirred, a memory of the man he had been before the mask, before the fall. "The creature is invisible to precognition. I cannot sense its future or its past. It is as if it was never born and will never die." "Fascinating." Palpatine leaned forward, his hologram distorting slightly. "I have spent decades studying the dark side, peeling back the mysteries of death itself, and yet here is something that should not exist within our understanding. A soul bound to a corpse, powered by something other than the Force. I must have it, Lord Vader. I must understand how it was created." "It will not surrender willingly," Vader observed. "The encounter suggests a creature of significant combat capability and unknown limits. Dispatching conventional forces will result only in casualties. Then dispatch unconventional ones." The Emperor's smile was a thing of nightmares, the expression of someone who had looked into the abyss and found it lacking. "Contact the Black Sunday. Tell them there is a bounty on this creature, alive and intact. 10 million credits to whoever brings it before me. And Vader, send the seventh sister as well. Her skills in psychological warfare may prove effective where brute force failed." The hologram flickered out, leaving Vader alone with his thoughts and the distant sound of his own breathing. He considered the Emperor's orders, the casual way Palpatine sought to capture and dissect something that might be beyond even Sith understanding. And deep within the prison of his armor, Anakin Skywalker remembered what it felt like to be hunted, to be feared for power rather than respected for choice. He pushed the memory down into the darkness where such things belonged and began composing the bounty notice. Spawn found refuge in a condemned section of the underlevels, a cluster of buildings so structurally unsound that even the desperate avoided them. Here, among the groaning metal and failing gravity stabilizers, he had space to think, to process the impossible situation he found himself in. The necroplasm had settled around him, dormant but alert, and he could feel its confusion, its hunger for the familiar energies of hell that sustained it. But there was nothing familiar here. This was a different universe entirely, a galaxy where technology and mysticism intertwined in ways he was still struggling to comprehend. The woman with the spinning red blades had moved with supernatural speed, had generated force through pure will, and when he had touched her, the necroplasm had tasted something in her soul that was both alien and disturbingly familiar. Power corrupted, ambition twisted into cruelty, the same sickness that had consumed Malabolgia and every other being that sought dominion over others. He thought of Wanda, his wife in the life before death, the woman whose face he could barely remember but whose memory drove everything he did. He thought of Cyan, the daughter who was not his but whom he had protected anyway. He thought of the people of Rat City who had feared him but accepted his protection because they had no other choice. And now, in this new hell, he saw the same dynamic playing out, the powerful preying on the powerless, systems of oppression grinding down those who could not fight back. Some things, it seemed, truly were universal. A sound reached him through the gloom, footsteps careful and deliberate. Spawn melted into the shadows, his costume responding to his will, becoming part of the darkness itself. A figure entered the condemned building, moving with the cautious grace of someone who had learned to navigate dangerous spaces. It was the Twi'lek woman from before, her blaster now drawn but held low, non-threatening. "I know you're here," she called out, her voice echoing slightly. "I'm not with the Empire, and I'm not stupid enough to try to collect the bounty they just posted. I just want to talk." Spawn materialized from the darkness behind her, making no sound, and spoke. "How did you find me?" To her credit, she did not scream or fire. She turned slowly, hands visible, and regarded him with those sharp, calculating eyes. "I've lived in these levels my whole life. I know how people hide, where they go when they need to disappear. And you're not as subtle as you think. You leave burn marks wherever you walk, and the air gets cold around you. Easy to track, if you know what to look for. What do you want?" "To warn you," she said simply. "The Empire isn't just coming with soldiers next time. They put a bounty on you, 10 million credits alive. That's enough to buy a planet in some systems. Every hunter, mercenary, and desperate criminal in the underlevels is going to come after you. And that's before the real threats arrive." "Real threats?" She nodded. "The Inquisitors were just the advance force. If you're really as dangerous as that fight suggested, they'll send Vader. And if Vader comes, nothing survives. He's the Emperor's right hand, his enforcer, and there are stories about what he can do, things that make that woman with the spinning lightsaber look like a training droid." Spawn considered this. He had faced supposedly unstoppable enemies before, demons and angels and things in between, and he had survived through cunning, brutality, and the simple refusal to stay dead. But this galaxy operated on rules he did not yet understand, powers he could not anticipate. And the necroplasm was finite. He had a limited supply of hellspawn energy, and every time he used his powers, he burned through it. In his own world, he could replenish it through deals with demons, through the constant ambient energy of hell's influence. Here, he had no such source. He was, for perhaps the first time in his cursed existence, truly alone. "Why warn me?" he asked. "What do you gain from keeping me alive?" The Twi'lek smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Because you scared them. In one fight, you made the Empire retreat. Do you know how rare that is? How impossible? People down here have been suffering under Imperial rule since the Clone Wars ended, watching as the Emperor turned the Republic into a machine designed to exploit and control. And nobody fights back because fighting back means death, means reprisal, means your family gets rounded up and sent to labor camps, or worse." She stepped closer, her eyes intense. "But you fought back, and you won. And that means something. That means maybe there's hope." "I'm not hope," Spawn said, and his voice carried the weight of years of damnation. "I'm a weapon. I'm a killer. Everything I touch turns to ash. Then point yourself at the Empire and burn them instead of us." She extended a hand. "My name is Kira Sin. I'm a smuggler, a thief, and about a dozen other things that would get me executed on any civilized world. And I'm offering you something you need." "What?" "Information, allies, a way to survive in a galaxy that wants you dead or dissected. Kirasin's smile sharpened. You're powerful, I can see that, but power without understanding is just rage, and rage gets you killed. Let me teach you how this galaxy works, and in return, you keep doing what you did tonight. Protect people who can't protect themselves. Fight the Empire. Be the monster they're afraid of instead of the one they control. Spawn stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Every instinct warned him against trust, against connection, against hope. He had been betrayed by his government, murdered by his friend, and damned by his own choices. Trust had earned him nothing but suffering, but he was trapped in an alien galaxy with no way home and enemies he did not understand. And Kirasin was right about one thing. Rage without direction was just destruction, and he had seen enough meaningless destruction to last 1,000 lifetimes. He took her hand, and the necroplasm recoiled slightly from the contact, unused to touch that did not carry threat or terror. Kirasin gripped firmly, sealing the bargain, and in that moment, an alliance was born that would shake the foundations of the Empire. First lesson, she said, releasing his hand. The Force. You need to understand what those Inquisitors are using because they're going to come at you with it again, and next time you might not be lucky. Over the next hours, as Coruscant's artificial night cycle deepened and the underlevels descended into their unique brand of darkness, Kirasin explained the fundamentals of the galaxy Spawn now inhabited. She told him of the Jedi, warrior monks who had served the Republic for millennia, wielding an energy field called the Force that connected all living things. She described their fall, the betrayal that had killed thousands in a single night, orchestrated by the very man who now ruled the Empire. She spoke of the Sith, ancient enemies of the Jedi, who drew power from emotion and passion, who sought domination rather than balance. The Emperor, she explained, was a Sith Lord of terrible power, and his apprentice Vader was a fallen Jedi who had helped slaughter his own order. Together, they had transformed a democratic republic into an authoritarian regime that spanned the galaxy, crushing dissent and enslaving entire species to fuel an endless military expansion. The Force, she continued, is what gave them power. It's in all living things, but only a few can actually use it, manipulate it. The Jedi trained for years to master it, to keep their emotions in check and serve the light side. The Sith do the opposite, feeding their anger and hate to fuel the dark side. Both sides have abilities that seem impossible. Telekinesis, mind control, precognition, lightning from their fingertips, and lightsabers, blades of pure plasma contained by magnetic fields that can cut through almost anything. Spawn absorbed this information, comparing it to what he knew of magic and mysticism from his own world. The Force sounded similar to the spiritual energies that various traditions accessed, but more pervasive, more fundamental to reality itself. And if these Sith drew power from negative emotion, they were not so different from the demons he had fought, beings that fed on suffering and spread it wherever they went. You said I don't touch the Force, he recalled. That Inquisitor said it too. What does that mean? Kirasin frowned, working through the implications. I'm not Force-sensitive myself, so I can't say for certain, but from what I understand, everything living generates a presence in the Force. Even droids and ships can be perceived through it if you're skilled enough. But you're somehow outside of it, like you don't exist in the same way the rest of us do. She paused. Are you even alive? I mean, really alive? No. The answer was simple and absolute. I died years ago. What you're looking at is a corpse animated by necroplasm, a substance from hell itself, bound to my soul through a deal I made with a demon lord. I'm undead, a revenant, sustained by power that should have consumed me completely but didn't because I was too angry to let go. The Twi'lek processed this with remarkable composure. That explains some things. The cold, the way normal weapons don't seem to hurt you, the feeling that you're not quite here. You're literally outside the natural order, and the Force doesn't know what to do with you. She smiled slightly. That might actually be an advantage. Jedi and Sith rely heavily on sensing their opponents through the Force, predicting their movements, reading their intentions. If you're invisible to that, you're fighting them blind. But their weapons can still hurt me, Spawn noted, remembering the lightsaber's impact. The necroplasm recoiled from that blade. Whatever it is, it can damage the symbiote. Then we need to find you something that can resist it, or at least deflect it. Kira Sin stood, pacing the abandoned room. There's a black market down here that deals in restricted technology. Cortosis, a mineral that shorts out lightsabers on contact. Beskar, the armor the Mandalorians use, nearly indestructible. Probably other options too. But all of it costs money, and money requires work. What kind of work? The kind that matches your skill set. She turned to face him, her expression serious. The Black Sun controls most of the underlevels, running protection rackets, smuggling operations, and worse, they prey on people who can't defend themselves, just like the Empire does from above. And now, they've got a bounty on you, which means they're mobilizing their forces. We could hit them first, disrupt their operations, take their resources, and send a message that the underlevels aren't their personal hunting ground anymore. Spawn felt something stir within him, not quite hope, but something close to purpose. This was familiar territory, the fight against organized crime, against systems of exploitation. He had waged this war in New York, burning his way through the mafia and corrupt police alike. The faces were different here, the weapons more advanced, but the underlying dynamic was the same. Predators hunting the weak. And him, the predator of predators. "Tell me where to find them," he said, and his eyes burned brighter in the darkness. Kira Sin grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." The Black Sun's operations in Subsector 773 ran through a converted warehouse that had once housed Republic-era medical supplies. Now it served as a depot for spice, illegal weapons, and slaves awaiting transport to markets in the Outer Rim. The facility was guarded by a private security force, mercenaries paid well enough to be loyal and equipped well enough to handle most threats. Heavy repeating blasters at the entrances, shield generators protecting the perimeter, and a small army of enforcers inside made it effectively impregnable to anyone foolish enough to attack directly. Spawn stood on a rooftop 300 meters away, his cape snapping in the recycled wind that flowed through the underlevel's ventilation system, and studied the target through eyes that could see in the darkness better than any natural human. Kira Sin crouched beside him, macrobinoculars raised, identifying targets and weak points with professional efficiency. 30 guards visible, probably twice that inside, she reported. Shift change happens in 20 minutes, which gives us a window when they're distracted. Main entrance is a kill zone, but there's a service duct here. She indicated a thermal vent on the warehouse's western side. Leads into the maintenance section, should be lightly guarded. "I'm not sneaking in," Spawn said flatly. "They need to see me coming. They need to be afraid." Kira Sin lowered the macrobinoculars and looked at him with new understanding. "You're not just hitting them, you're sending a message." "Yes. That's going to bring every Black Sun enforcer in the sector down on our heads." "Good. Let them come." She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "All right. Then we do it loud. But I'm providing support from here. Those repeating blasters will shred me. And unlike you, I'm very much alive and would prefer to stay that way." She pulled a long-barreled rifle from her pack, a weapon that looked like it had been assembled from 6 different firearms. "I'll take out the generators when you make your move." Without shields, their defenses drop by half. Spawn nodded once, then stepped off the rooftop. He did not fall so much as descend with terrible purpose, his cape spreading wide to catch the air, gliding down toward the warehouse in a spiral of darkness and green fire. The guards saw him coming when he was still 50 meters up, saw the impossible figure wreathed in necroplasmic flame, and opened fire without waiting for orders. Red blaster bolts lanced upward, tracking his descent, and Spawn let them come. The necroplasm caught the bolts like a net catching fish, absorbing the energy and converting it into fuel for the symbiote's hunger. Each impact made him stronger, feeding the rage that powered his existence. And when he landed in front of the main entrance, the ground cratered beneath his boots. The guards stumbled, their aim disrupted, and Spawn moved. His chains erupted from his body like living things, dozens of them, each tipped with barbs designed to tear and rend. They wrapped around guards and weapons alike, yanking mercenaries from their positions and crushing them against walls and each other. Screams filled the air, cut short by the sickening crunch of armor compressing around flesh. Spawn walked forward through the carnage, each step inexorable, and the heavy repeating blasters swiveled to target him. Kira Sin's rifle barked once, twice, 3 times from her distant perch. The shield generators exploded in sequence, overloading in cascades of electrical discharge, and suddenly the warehouse's defenses were wide open. The repeating blasters opened fire, streams of plasma hot enough to melt durasteel, but without the shields to provide overlapping fields of fire. Spawn simply moved through the gaps, his supernatural reflexes and the necroplasm's protection allowing him to navigate the death zone. He reached the main entrance and did not bother with the door. His fist, wreathed in green hellfire, struck the reinforced durasteel and punched through like it was paper. The necroplasm spread across the surface, corroding and weakening the molecular bonds, and with a wrench of inhuman strength, Spawn tore the entire door from its frame and hurled it into the warehouse beyond. It struck a transport speeder, flattening the vehicle, and alarm klaxons began to wail. Inside, chaos reigned. Guards scrambled for positions, officers screamed orders, and in the center of it all, the merchandise, living beings chained and caged, watched with wide eyes as something impossible invaded their prison. Spawn saw them, saw the fear and the faint ember of hope, and felt the familiar fury rise. Slavery, exploitation, the strong devouring the weak, hell wearing a different face. "What are you waiting for?" he roared at the guards, his voice echoing through the warehouse with unnatural projection. "Come on, come and die." They came in waves, professionals and criminals alike, united by the instinct for survival and the hope that numbers might prevail where individual strength could not. Blasters fired from all directions, creating a storm of plasma that should have reduced him to ash. Spawn's cape expanded to cover his entire body, forming a cocoon of living shadow, and every bolt that struck it was absorbed, pulled into the necroplasm's endless hunger. Then the cape exploded outward, releasing all that stored energy in a blast of concussive force that sent guards flying like leaves. Spawn charged into the resulting gap, his movements too fast to track, and the warehouse became an abattoir. He caught a weak-way mercenary by the head and slammed him through a support pillar. He ripped a blaster from a human guard's hands and crushed both the weapon and the fingers holding it. He wrapped his chains around a group trying to flank him and pulled them all together, letting them feel each other's terror before rendering them unconscious with carefully controlled brutality. He was not trying to kill, not yet. He wanted them alive to carry the message. A thermal detonator landed at his feet, the red light blinking with terminal finality. Spawn looked at it, at the guard who had thrown it from behind a barricade, and then bent down and picked it up. The necroplasm flowed over the device, smothering it, containing the explosion that should have vaporized everything within 10 meters. The blast occurred, muffled and constrained, and when he opened his hand, only ash remained. He looked at the guard, saw the man's face go white with terror, and smiled beneath the mask. Nice try. The chains took him a moment later. A door at the back of the warehouse exploded outward, and something new entered the battle. It was a droid, but unlike any Spawn had encountered in his brief time in this galaxy. 4 meters tall, humanoid in basic shape, but covered in combat plating and bristling with weapons. A dark trooper, one of the Empire's experimental war machines, unleashed by Black Sun in desperation. Its photoreceptors locked onto Spawn, and it raised both arms, revealing integrated repeating blasters that began to spin up. "Now that's more interesting," Spawn muttered, and charged. The dark trooper opened fire with everything it had, the air itself seeming to ignite from the density of plasma, and Spawn leaped over the barrage, his cape propelling him upward and forward. He came down on the droid's shoulders, his weight and momentum driving it to one knee, and his chains wrapped around its head. The necroplasm began to corrode the armor, seeking weak points, but the droid's construction was robust, designed to resist exactly this kind of attack. The machine surged upward, servos screaming, and grabbed Spawn with hands designed to crush starship hulls. It slammed him into the floor once, twice, 3 times, each impact creating craters in the reinforced permacrete. Warning signals flashed through the symbiote's consciousness as systems began to strain, and Spawn realized with cold clarity that the droid was strong enough to actually hurt him. He released the chains, and instead grabbed the droid's arms, and the struggle that followed was one of pure physical strength, hell-forged necroplasm against Imperial engineering. They grappled, neither giving ground, and the warehouse shook with the force of their combat. The droid's photoreceptors blazed brighter, calculating angles and leverage points, searching for a way to break the deadlock. Spawn found it first. He redirected his grip, sliding along the droid's arms rather than fighting them, and got his hands around its head. The necroplasm poured forth, not trying to corrode anymore but to infiltrate, to find the gaps in the armor and reach the circuitry beneath. The symbiote had faced technological opponents before, and it knew that every machine had weaknesses, connection points where different systems interfaced. The droid thrashed, trying to shake him off, but Spawn held on with inhuman tenacity, and the necroplasm found what it was looking for. It slithered into the droid's central processor through cooling vents, alien matter meeting alien programming, and began to corrupt. Not destroy, but corrupt, rewriting commands, inserting chaos into ordered systems. The Dark Trooper seized, its limbs locking in place, and Spawn dropped from its shoulders as it toppled backward like a felled tree. It hit the ground with a crash that shook the entire structure, and did not rise. Sparks flickered across its surface, where the necroplasm had compromised its integrity, and its photoreceptors dimmed to black. Spawn turned to face the remaining guards, and found them staring at him with expressions beyond fear, beyond horror, something approaching religious terror. He had defeated their best weapons, had walked through their defenses like they were nothing, and now stood among them like a demon from nightmare made manifest. "Last chance," he said quietly, and the warehouse fell silent save for the crackle of fires and the moans of the injured. "Open the cages. Free everyone you've imprisoned. Then get out and tell your masters that this sector is closed to them now. Anyone who tries to operate here answers to me." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, a Rhodian guard stumbled toward the control panel that governed the slave cages, his movements jerky with shock. He entered the release codes with trembling hands, and the energy fields flickered and died. The prisoners, humans and aliens alike, began to emerge from their confinement, uncertain and afraid but free. "Go," Spawn commanded the guards, and they went, fleeing into the night, leaving behind their weapons and their fallen comrades. He watched them go, ensuring none turned back to reclaim their captive merchandise, and only when the last had disappeared did he allow himself to relax slightly. Kira entered through the main entrance, her rifle slung over her shoulder, and surveyed the devastation with professional appreciation. "Well, you certainly made an impression. Half of them are going to need therapy. The other half are going to need new jobs." She looked at the freed prisoners, who were beginning to gather near the exit, uncertain where to go in the underlevel's endless maze. What about them? Spawn considered the question. He had freed them, but freedom without purpose was just another form of imprisonment. They needed more than liberation. They needed hope, direction, a reason to believe that their lives could be something other than an endless cycle of exploitation and suffering. "Can you help them?" he asked Kira. "Get them to somewhere safe? Find them shelter, work, whatever they need?" She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You're asking a lot. I'm a smuggler, not a charity. Taking care of this many people requires resources I don't have, and connections that would get me killed if I used them too obviously." She paused, studying the desperate faces. "But I know people who might help. There are resistance cells down here, groups trying to undermine the Empire through small acts of defiance. They'd take these people in, hide them, give them purpose. Question is, are you going to keep doing this? Because one warehouse is a message, 10 warehouses is a war, and wars require resources. Then we get resources, Spawn said simply. Black Sun has more operations. We hit them all, take what they've stolen, and use it to fund the resistance. Every credit we take from them is a credit that doesn't go towards suffering. Kirasin's grin was feral. Now you're thinking like a revolutionary. All right, I'm in. But we need more than just the two of us if we're going to take on an entire criminal empire. We need allies, people with skills and grudges against Black Sunday, and we need information, detailed intelligence on their operations, their leadership, their response times. She gestured to the warehouse around them. This place will have records, manifests, communication logs. Let me dig through their systems while you stand guard. Knowledge is the real treasure here. Spawn nodded, positioning himself at the entrance while Kirasin went to work on the warehouse's computer systems. Behind him, the freed prisoners began to file out, many of them looking back at him with expressions he could not quite read. Fear, yes, but also something else. Gratitude, hope. The belief that maybe, just maybe, someone was finally fighting for them instead of exploiting them. It was a responsibility he had not sought but found himself accepting anyway, because in the end, stripped of all the powers and the curses and the damnation, Al Simmons had been a soldier who fought to protect the innocent. And Spawn, for all his rage and horror, carried that core truth within him still. The night deepened around them, and in the distance, sirens began to wail as Imperial forces responded to reports of chaos in the underlevels. But they were far away still, and Spawn had time to prepare for what came next. The war had truly begun. Far above, in the Imperial Palace, Darth Vader stood before a holographic display showing the aftermath of Spawn's raid. The warehouse was a ruin, the Dark Trooper disabled, and 36 guards hospitalized or missing. The Emperor's prize had not been captured. It had, instead, declared war on the entire criminal infrastructure of Coruscant's underworld. Your assessment, Lord Vader. Palpatine's voice crackled through the chamber's speakers, the Emperor monitoring the situation from his private sanctum. The creature is adapting, Vader reported, his mechanical breathing steady. It learns quickly, targets strategically, and demonstrates tactical intelligence beyond simple rage. The attack on Black Sun's operation was precise, efficient, and designed to maximize disruption while minimizing its own exposure. And your recommendation? Vader considered the question, weighing options through the cold calculus that governed his existence. The creature was dangerous, yes, but it was also predictable in its way. It fought for the oppressed, stood against exploitative power structures, followed a moral code that could be understood if not predicted through the Force. That made it manipulable, vulnerable to strategies that did not rely on direct confrontation. Deploy the Seventh Sister as planned, he said finally, but with a different objective, not capture, but recruitment. The silence that followed was profound, stretching across several breathing cycles. Then, explain. The creature opposes the Empire because it sees us as oppressors, as exploiters of the weak. It has allied with criminal elements because they oppose us as well, not from ideology but from simple enmity. Vader gestured to the hologram, highlighting the freed slaves, but it could be made to understand that the Empire represents order, that chaos is the true enemy. If convinced that Black Sun and similar organizations are greater threats than Imperial rule, it might redirect its violence accordingly. You propose to turn it against our criminal rivals? To use it as a weapon? Yes, my master. And if it refuses, we will have learned valuable intelligence about its decision-making process. Intelligence that can be exploited in future engagements. Palpatine's laugh echoed through the chamber, cold and calculating. How deliciously pragmatic, Lord Vader. Very well, proceed with your plan. But remember, if this creature proves unable or unwilling to serve, I want it destroyed. No aberration can be permitted to challenge Imperial authority, regardless of its potential utility. The transmission ended, leaving Vader alone with his thoughts and the holographic ruin of the Black Sun warehouse. He reviewed the footage again, watching Spawn's movements, the way it fought, the efficiency of its violence. There was something familiar about it, something that tugged at memories buried deep beneath layers of pain and conditioning. A protector, a guardian, someone who fought not for glory or power, but from genuine conviction that the strong should defend the weak. Vader pushed the recognition away, buried it beneath the dark side's numbing embrace. Such thoughts were weakness, remnants of Anakin Skywalker, and Anakin Skywalker was dead. Only Vader remained, the Emperor's fist, the enforcer of order through overwhelming power. But as he left the chamber to prepare the Seventh Sister's briefing, a small part of him wondered what that creature in the underlevels might have thought of a young slave boy from Tatooine who had once dreamed of freeing all the slaves in the galaxy. Some dreams died harder than others. The days that followed Spawn's initial raid became a legend in the underlevels, spreading through word of mouth and pirate communications networks with the speed of wildfire. The creature in the mask, the demon who protected instead of preyed, had struck 3 more Black Sun operations in rapid succession, each assault more devastating than the last. A spice processing plant reduced to rubble, a weapons cache liberated and distributed to resistance cells, a command center burned to the ground, its leadership scattered and terrified. Spawn moved through the underlevels like a force of nature, unstoppable and inexorable, and everywhere he went, the oppressed found courage and the oppressors found fear. Kira Sin coordinated their strikes with precision born of years navigating the criminal underworld, identifying targets, mapping patrol routes, and ensuring their operations hit maximum impact with minimal risk. She had recruited others to their cause, a small network of smugglers, hackers, and disillusioned soldiers who had grown tired of watching the galaxy burn. But success brought attention, and attention brought danger. Spawn stood atop a transit hub, his cape billowing in the processed air currents, and looked out over the section of the underlevels he had claimed as his territory. Below, people moved with slightly less fear than they had a week ago, walking streets that were still dangerous but no longer dominated by the absolute tyranny of organized crime. It was not freedom, not really, but it was better than what had come before. "We've got a problem." Kira Sin's voice crackled through the comlink they had acquired from Imperial salvage. Multiple Imperial transports just descended into the sector, not stormtroopers this time. Something else. Spawn activated the comlink with a thought, the necroplasm interfacing with the technology in ways that continued to surprise Kira Sin's technical contacts. How many? 3 transports, triangular configuration, definitely not standard deployment patterns. And I'm picking up a single life sign descending separately on what looks like a personal craft. A pause. "Spawn, I think they're sending an Inquisitor again. But not alone this time. The energy signatures suggest they're bringing heavy support. Location, converging on your position. I think they know where you are. I think they've been tracking you somehow." Spawn considered this. He had been careful, moving through the underlevels using routes that avoided surveillance, hitting targets quickly and disappearing before Imperial reinforcements could arrive. But the Force, from what Kira Sin had explained, granted abilities beyond normal tracking, ways of sensing and predicting that did not rely on technology. If they had sent someone truly skilled, someone who had learned to read patterns rather than relying solely on Force perception, they might have anticipated his location through analysis rather than mysticism. "Fall back to the safe house," he ordered. "This fight is mine. Like hell it is. We're a team, remember? Teams don't work when one member is effectively immortal and the other is very, very mortal." Spawn countered, his voice firm. "I can take risks you can't. I'll hold them here and extract when necessary. You coordinate evacuation of the civilian population within 3 blocks. If this turns into a real battle, people are going to get hurt." Silence stretched across the comm for several heartbeats. Then, "Fine. But you better survive this. I'm getting used to having a demon on my side." The connection cut, and Spawn was alone again with his thoughts and the approaching threat. The transports landed in a clearing below, their repulsor engines kicking up clouds of dust and refuse as armored ramps descended. Purge troopers emerged first, 50 of them, moving in perfect formation, their enhanced armor gleaming even in the underlevel's dim light. They spread out, establishing a perimeter, weapons raised and ready. Behind them came something new, war droids like the Dark Trooper but smaller, more agile, each carrying vibro weapons designed for close combat. And finally, descending from a personal craft that landed with minimal thrust, came the seventh sister. She was Miri Allen, her green skin marked with distinctive facial tattoos, and she moved with a grace that spoke of absolute confidence in her abilities. Her lightsaber hung at her belt, unignited, and her hands were empty and relaxed. But Spawn could feel the threat emanating from her, the sense that here was someone who had killed many times and would kill many more without hesitation or remorse. "Spawn," she called out, her voice carrying easily through the artificial silence the troopers had created. "I am the seventh sister, Inquisitor in service to the Emperor. I come to speak with you, not to fight, though I am prepared for both." Spawn dropped from the transit hub, falling 4 stories and landing with enough force to crater the ground, his cape spreading to absorb the impact. The purge troopers tensed, weapons tracking, but the seventh sister raised a hand, forestalling their fire. She approached slowly, her yellow eyes studying him with clinical interest. "You are not what I expected," she admitted. "The reports suggested a mindless creature of rage, but I see intelligence in your stance, purpose in your actions. You are a being of will, not instinct. What do you want?" Spawn demanded, his hands crackling with barely contained necroplasmic energy. "To understand you," the seventh sister replied simply. "You oppose Black Sun, disrupt their operations, free their prisoners, admirable goals, ones the Empire shares. Black Sun represents chaos, criminal disorder that undermines the stability we seek to maintain. In fighting them, you fight our enemy." "I fight all oppressors," Spawn corrected. "Black Sun, the Empire, anyone who grinds people down for profit or power. Don't pretend we're allies just because our enemies occasionally overlap, but we could be allies," she pressed, circling slowly, her movements predatory. "The Empire brings order to a chaotic galaxy. Yes, there is suffering, but suffering is temporary. Order is eternal, and with order comes peace, eventually. The criminals you fight, they thrive in chaos. Remove them, and the galaxy becomes a better place. By putting everyone in chains," Spawn growled. "I've seen your empire. I've seen what you do to the people you're supposed to protect. You're no different from the monsters I fought in my own world, just better organized." The seventh sister's expression hardened. "Then you are a fool. The Force itself shows me that order and control are necessary. The Jedi tried balance and failed, plunging the galaxy into war. We will succeed where they could not, because we understand that peace requires strength, discipline, the willingness to do what must be done, like enslaving entire species, like crushing anyone who speaks against you, like eliminating those who would return us to chaos." She stopped circling, facing him directly. "I offer you a choice, Spawn. Join us. Direct your power against true threats, not against the institutions that maintain civilization. Serve the Empire, and you will have resources, support, the ability to do far more good than you can achieve alone in these underlevels." Spawn laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the surrounding buildings. "I've heard this speech before. Different words, same poison. You want to use me, turn me into a weapon for your agenda, but I've been a weapon for others, and it cost me everything. I don't serve anyone anymore except my own conscience." "Then you will be destroyed," the seventh sister said, and her voice carried genuine regret. "Lord Vader predicted you would refuse. He hoped you might be pragmatic, but you are not. You are simply another idealist who will break against the galaxy's reality." Her hand moved to her lightsaber. "I'm sorry. You would have been a valuable asset." The purge troopers opened fire. Spawn's cape exploded outward, forming a barrier that absorbed the initial salvo, and he launched himself forward, closing the distance to the seventh sister before she could fully activate her lightsaber. But she was faster than Varesh had been, her connection to the dark side granting her enhanced reflexes, and she ignited the blade in a rising arc that would have bisected him from hip to shoulder. The necroplasm recoiled from the plasma, and Spawn twisted in mid-air, the blade passing close enough to sear the edge of his costume. He hit the ground rolling, chains erupting from his body to create a defensive perimeter, and the war droids charged into them. Vibroblades met necroplasmic chains, exotic matter clashing, and neither gave way immediately. The droids were strong, their programming optimized for combat against Force users, and they fought with coordinated precision that forced Spawn to divide his attention. The seventh sister used the opening, her lightsaber spinning in a complex pattern, cutting through chains as fast as they formed. She moved with the Force, each step predicted and enhanced, and began to drive Spawn back. He grabbed a war droid and used it as a shield, the machine's armor absorbing several lightsaber strikes before its power core overloaded, and hurled the sparking wreckage at her. She Force pushed it aside, but the action created a moment's distraction, enough for Spawn to close again. This time he caught her wrist, his gauntleted hand clamping down with crushing force, and the seventh sister screamed as necroplasm touched her skin. The contact sent visions flooding through her mind, just as it had with Varesh, every dark act she had committed reflected through her victim's eyes. But she was stronger, more disciplined, and she channeled the pain into fury, the dark side surging through her. Lightning erupted from her free hand, blue-white energy that arced across Spawn's body, and for the first time he felt real pain. The electricity was not normal current but Force lightning, manifestation of pure dark side energy, and it burned in ways that conventional electricity could not. The necroplasm writhed, trying to adapt, but this was power of a different order entirely. Spawn released her wrist and staggered back, smoke rising from his costume, and the seventh sister advanced, both hands now crackling with lightning. "You see?" she hissed, her face twisted with righteous fury. "The Force is absolute. Your power, whatever it is, cannot stand against it. Surrender now, or I will burn you from existence." But Spawn had faced pain before, pain that made this seem trivial by comparison. He had burned in the fires of hell, had felt his flesh consumed and regenerated in endless cycles, had endured torments designed by beings whose entire existence was dedicated to suffering. This Inquisitor's lightning was nothing compared to that. He reached deep within himself, down to the core where the necroplasm and his soul intertwined, and drew forth power he had been conserving, energy he knew would not be easily replaced in this alien galaxy. Green hellfire erupted around him, cold flames that consumed the lightning and spread outward, and the seventh sister's confident expression turned to shock. Spawn charged through her attack, wreathed in necroplasmic fire, and grabbed her by the throat. The hellfire spread across her body, not burning but freezing, sapping warmth and strength, and she clawed at his hand with both of hers, the Force abandoning her as her body temperature plummeted. He lifted her from the ground, holding her at arm's length, and spoke with terrible finality. "I've fought demons and angels. I've stood against heaven and hell. You think your empire scares me? You think your Force makes you invincible?" He pulled her closer, let her see the fire in his eyes. "I am damnation walking. I am the consequence every tyrant fears, and I will burn your empire to ash if that's what it takes to protect these people." He released her, and she collapsed, gasping, her body trembling from the cold and the contact with something her dark side training had never prepared her for. The purge troopers moved to cover her, dragging her back toward the transports, and the war droids formed a defensive line, their programming recognizing a tactical retreat when necessary. Spawn let them go, standing alone in the clearing as his hellfire guttered and died, the precious energy expended. Around him, the underlevels were silent, thousands of eyes watching from windows and alleys, seeing what he had done, what he represented. He had driven off an Inquisitor, had stood against Imperial might, and emerged victorious. But victory had come at a cost. The necroplasm was depleted, its reserves lower than they had been since his arrival in this galaxy, and he had no way to replenish what he had spent. Every battle brought him closer to the edge, to the moment when his power would fail and leave him vulnerable. Kirasin emerged from cover, her expression caught between elation and concern. "You did it. You actually drove them off." Then she saw how he stood, slightly hunched, favoring his left side where the lightning had struck hardest. But it hurt you. That lightning, it got through somehow. The Force, Spawn confirmed, his voice rougher than usual. It's energy of a different type than what the necroplasm is designed to counter. I can resist it, but not indefinitely. And every time I use my full power, I burn through energy I might not be able to replace. Then we need to be smarter, Kira Sin said firmly. No more direct confrontations unless absolutely necessary. We hit and run, we use strategy instead of brute force, we preserve your strength for when it matters most. She looked around at the gathering crowd, people emerging now that the battle was over. And we need to expand. You've proven something today, shown that the Empire can be hurt, can be beaten. People are going to want to join that fight. I don't want to lead a rebellion, Spawn protested. I just want to protect the innocent. Sometimes those are the same thing. Kira Sin placed a hand on his arm, feeling the necroplasm recoil slightly before recognizing her as non-hostile. You're a symbol now, whether you want to be or not. These people are going to follow you because you give them hope. The question is whether you're going to use that, guide it towards something productive, or let it grow wild and get people killed. Spawn looked at the faces surrounding him, humans and aliens alike, and saw the same expression he had seen 1,000 times before. Desperate hope. The fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, someone was finally strong enough to challenge the forces that oppressed them. He had never wanted to be a leader, a symbol, a figure of revolution. He had only ever wanted to do what was right, to protect those who could not protect themselves. But Kira Sin was right. He had become something more than just a fighter, and with that came responsibility. All right, he said finally. We build something. Not an army, but a network. People helping people, fighting back in whatever way they can. We give them the tools and the courage, and they decide how to use them. Kira Sin smiled. Now you're thinking like a revolutionary. Come on, we have planning to do and contacts to make. The Empire's going to come back harder next time, and we need to be ready. They disappeared into the underlevels together, leaving behind only scorch marks and the whispered beginnings of a legend. In the depths beneath Coruscant, where even the underlevels' desperate inhabitants feared to tread, the Temple of the Wills stood unchanged by time or turmoil. The ancient structure's stones had absorbed millennia of history, bearing witness to the rise and fall of civilizations, the endless cycle of light and dark that defined the galaxy's narrative. And within its deepest chamber, Jocasta Nu's holocron continued its vigil, processing data, compiling observations, struggling to classify the unclassifiable. The device had monitored Spawn's battles through seismic sensors and atmospheric disturbances, tracking his movements across the underlevels with the patient precision of a scholar. Each encounter provided more data points, more evidence to support or refute the hypotheses it had formulated. And with each new observation, the holocron's conclusions grew more troubling. Subject continues to demonstrate autonomous moral agency. Jocasta Nu's spectral form reported to the empty chamber, her voice echoing off stones that had not heard human speech in generations. Despite necromantic corruption and apparent damnation, Subject chooses to protect innocent life and oppose exploitative systems. This contradicts all recorded behaviors of undead entities, which typically demonstrate only hunger, rage, or servitude to their creators. The holocron paused, processing, its crystalline matrix flickering with concentration. Hypothesis: Subject possesses fully intact consciousness and free will despite death state. Implications: Death is not absolute cessation of personhood, at least not for all beings. Corollary: The Force's traditional understanding of death and the beyond may be incomplete. Another pause. Longer this time, as the holocron wrestled with concepts that challenged thousands of years of Jedi philosophy. Warning: Subject's existence suggests the possibility of life after death, consciousness beyond corporeal form, achieved through means other than Force transcendence. This knowledge could destabilize existing theological frameworks. Recommendation: Careful study required before wider dissemination. The spectral Jocasta Nu flickered, her expression troubled even in holographic form. Additional concern: Subject's power appears finite, depleting with use and showing no signs of natural regeneration in this dimension. Subject is fighting a war of attrition that it cannot win long-term. Prediction: either subject will discover a means of power restoration, or it will eventually be destroyed through accumulated depletion. The holocron fell silent, its observations complete for now, and waited in the darkness for someone to find it, to access the knowledge it contained. But the Temple of the Wills remained forgotten, buried beneath layers of history and urban sprawl, and Jocasta Nu's warnings went unheard by those who might have understood their significance. Above, in the Imperial Palace, Darth Vader reviewed the Seventh Sister's report with his usual mechanical precision. She sat before him in his meditation chamber, still trembling slightly from her encounter with Spawn's power, her confidence shattered by contact with something her training had never anticipated. "It burns without heat," she reported, her voice unsteady. "The fire it generates is cold, freezing, draining life force rather than consuming flesh. And when it touched me, I saw things, felt things, experiences I had suppressed or forgotten. It showed me my victims, made me feel their pain as if it were my own." "The dark side teaches us to embrace our actions," Vader observed. "To accept our choices without remorse or hesitation. This creature attacks that certainty. Forces confrontation with consequences we have learned to ignore. A weapon of psychological warfare, as much as physical. How do we fight something like that?" the Seventh Sister asked, and there was genuine fear in her voice. "Our lightsabers barely scratch it. Our force attacks are only partially effective, and direct contact with it is psychological torture. What options remain?" Vader did not answer immediately, his respirator cycling as he considered the problem. The creature called Spawn was unlike any enemy he had faced, a being that existed outside the normal parameters of force combat. Traditional Sith tactics assumed opponents who feared death, who could be predicted through the Force, who operated within the same fundamental reality as everyone else. Spawn broke all those assumptions, but there were other approaches, strategies that did not rely on force sensitivity or conventional combat. The Emperor's greatest weapon was not the dark side but patience, the willingness to wait and manipulate until victory became inevitable. And Vader, for all his power and rage, had learned that patience from his master. "We do not fight it directly," he said finally. "We fight its support structure. This creature has allied with the criminal elements of the underlevels, with smugglers and rebels who provide intelligence and logistics. Remove that support, and it becomes isolated, vulnerable. Then we can consider more permanent solutions." "You want to wage war on the entire underworld of Coruscant?" The Seventh Sister's voice carried disbelief. "That would require resources, troops, surveillance systems. The Emperor would never approve such an expenditure for a single target." "The Emperor need not know," Vader countered. "I have discretionary authority over Inquisitorious operations. We will frame this as a necessary crackdown on Black Sun in response to recent disruptions, a campaign to restore Imperial control over the underlevels. In the process, we will systematically eliminate everyone who has aided the creature, forcing it to operate alone or reveal itself through desperation." The Seventh Sister nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "And once isolated, we hit it with everything. Not to capture anymore, but to destroy." "Precisely." Vader stood, his massive frame dominating the chamber. "Return to your duties. I will coordinate the campaign and assign additional Inquisitors as needed. This creature will learn that defying the Empire has consequences that extend beyond its own existence." The Seventh Sister departed, leaving Vader alone with his thoughts and the ever-present pain that defined his existence. He walked to the chamber's viewport, looking out over Coruscant's glittering surface, and thought about the creature in the depths below, this thing that fought for the innocent despite being damned. There had been a time when Anakin Skywalker had fought for similar reasons, had believed that power should be used to protect rather than dominate. That idealism had died on Mustafar, burned away along with his human body, leaving only the certainty that order through strength was the galaxy's only salvation. But sometimes, in moments like this, When he was alone and the Emperor's presence was distant, Vader wondered if that certainty was genuine or just another form of self-deception, a way to live with what he had become. He pushed the thought away, buried it beneath layers of discipline and dark side conditioning, and began planning the campaign that would crush Spawn and everything it represented. There was no room for doubt in the Empire, no space for idealism or hope. There was only order, maintained through inevitable force. And Vader was nothing if not a force of nature. The weeks that followed saw Coruscant's underlevels transformed into a war zone, not through single battles but through systematic oppression. Imperial forces descended in waves, not targeting Spawn directly but everyone associated with his protection network. Smugglers' routes were blocked, safe houses were raided, and anyone caught providing aid to known resistance cells was arrested and disappeared into the Empire's prison system. Kirasin's network began to fracture under the pressure, people too afraid to continue fighting, too desperate to risk Imperial attention. The resources that had flowed to Spawn's operations dried up as contacts went silent or were captured. And through it all, Spawn fought a losing battle against overwhelming logistics, unable to be everywhere at once, unable to protect everyone who needed protection. He saved who he could, hitting Imperial convoys to free prisoners, disrupting raids before they could reach their targets. But for every success there were 3 failures, people he could not reach in time. The Necroplasm's reserves continued to deplete with each battle, each use of his powers bringing him closer to the edge of vulnerability. And he felt, for the first time since arriving in this galaxy, the weight of genuine despair. "We're losing," Kirasin admitted during a rare moment of respite, her voice hollow with exhaustion. They were holed up in an abandoned maintenance facility, one of the few places still secure enough for planning. "The Empire isn't fighting us directly anymore. They're strangling us, cutting off everything we need to operate. Food, information, medical supplies, all of it's disappearing. And people are turning on us, blaming us for bringing Imperial attention down on them." Spawn sat against a wall, his cape draped around him like a funeral shroud, and said nothing. What was there to say? She was right. They were losing, had perhaps always been losing from the moment he declared war on systems too vast and entrenched to be defeated by a single person, no matter how powerful. He had been arrogant, had believed that his abilities and his will would be enough to protect these people. He had been wrong. "There's something else," Kirasin continued reluctantly. "There are rumors, people in the deep underlevels, where not even smugglers go, talking about an old Jedi temple buried beneath the city. They say it contains knowledge, artifacts, things the Emperor hasn't found yet. If even half the stories are true, there might be something there that could help us, give us an edge we don't currently have." "The Jedi are gone," Spawn said, his voice rough with fatigue. "You told me they were hunted down, exterminated. What good would their artifacts do us now? The Jedi spent thousands of years studying the Force, learning about the galaxy, facing threats we can't even imagine. Maybe they encountered something like you before. Maybe they left records, information about powers outside the Force." She moved closer, her expression earnest. "I know it's a long shot, but we're out of short ones. Either we find something new, some advantage we haven't considered, or we accept that this war is over." Spawn looked at her, at the determination still burning in her eyes despite everything, and felt something stir within him. Hope was poison, he had learned that long ago, but maybe that was the point. Maybe fighting when hope was gone was what separated those who changed things from those who simply survived. "Where is this temple?" he asked. Kirasin smiled, relief flooding her features. "Deep. Deeper than anything on the public maps. I've got coordinates from a contact who claims to have been there years ago, before the Empire sealed off that section. It's going to be dangerous, probably trapped, and almost certainly crawling with things that evolved in the dark." She paused. "But if you're willing to try, so am I." Spawn stood, the necroplasm rippling across his form, and extended his hand. "Then let's go find out what the Jedi left behind." They descended into depths where even the underlevel's minimal infrastructure failed completely, following maintenance shafts and collapsed transit tunnels that predated the Republic itself. The darkness here was absolute, broken only by Spawn's glowing eyes and the occasional phosphorescent fungus clinging to ancient walls. Water dripped from unseen heights, pooling in corridors that had been dry for millennia, and the air tasted of decay and forgotten ages. Creatures stirred in the darkness, things that had evolved without light, without mercy, predators and scavengers adapted to an environment where anything living was potential food. Spawn's presence drove most away, the aura of death and power too alien for their simple nervous systems to process, but some were bolder or hungrier, and those met the necroplasm's hungry embrace. Kira followed close behind, her headlamp cutting narrow beams through the gloom, her blaster ready but rarely needed. She navigated by intuition and half-remembered maps, trusting in skills honed by years of smuggling runs through impossible spaces, and slowly, meter by meter, they descended toward the coordinates her contact had provided. The Temple of the Wills announced itself through architecture, the organic chaos of Coruscant's underbelly giving way suddenly to worked stone, carved symbols, deliberate design. A doorway stood in the wall, 10 meters high and half as wide, sealed by mechanisms that had long since failed but whose weight still resisted entry. Spawn examined it, his enhanced perception reading stress points and weak spots, then drove his fist through the center. The door shattered, ancient stone reduced to rubble by necroplasmic force, and beyond lay darkness even deeper than what they had traversed. But within that darkness was something else, a presence that made even Spawn hesitate, a sense of waiting, of observation, of intelligence vast and patient. Someone's home, he muttered, and stepped through. The temple's interior was preserved perfectly, protected by the same mechanisms that had sealed the door from the ravages of time and moisture. Columns rose toward a ceiling lost in shadows, carved with symbols that predated even Old Galactic, and at the chamber's center, on a pedestal of black stone, a holocron pulsed with faint blue light. Jocasta Nu's spectral form materialized as they approached, her aged features rendered eternal by the technology that preserved her knowledge. She looked at Spawn with eyes that saw more than human perception should allow, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of prophecy realized. "You came," she said simply. "The archives predicted something would eventually reach this place, some force or intelligence drawn by the knowledge contained here. But I never imagined it would be something like you. What are you?" Spawn demanded, uncertain whether he was addressing the woman or the device that projected her. "I am Jocasta Nu, or rather, an echo of her, a fragment of consciousness preserved through Jedi technology. The real Jocasta Nu died years ago, murdered by the Empire for the crime of preserving knowledge." The hologram gestured around at the temple. "This is my final work, a repository of everything the Jedi learned across millennia, including things the Council thought too dangerous to study openly." "Including me?" Spawn's eyes narrowed. "You've been watching me. Since the moment you arrived in this galaxy, yes. Your presence created ripples in the force that reached even here, disturbances that my monitoring systems detected and catalogued." Jocasta Nu's expression softened slightly. "You are an anomaly, Spawn. A being that should not exist within the natural order, sustained by forces this galaxy does not comprehend, and yet you choose to act with moral purpose, to protect and defend despite your own damnation. That makes you unique, perhaps unprecedented. Can you help me?" The question came out harsher than Spawn intended, desperation leaking through despite his efforts at control. "I'm running out of power, out of time. Every battle drains me, and I have no way to replenish what I spend. If you've been studying me, maybe you know something I don't, some way to survive here." The holocron pulsed, processing, and Jocasta Nu's image flickered as if struggling with a difficult decision. "There may be something," she said finally. "The Jedi encountered many phenomena over the millennia, beings and powers that defied our understanding of the Force. One such encounter involved a species called the Zakul, who drew power not from the Force directly, but from extreme emotional states channeled through ancient technology. Their techniques might be adaptable to your unique situation." "Explain," Kira interjected, stepping forward. "What kind of techniques?" The Zakul believed that consciousness itself generated energy, that thoughts and emotions were not merely mental states, but tangible forces that could be harnessed and directed. They built machines called resonance chambers that amplified these emissions, collecting them and feeding them back to Force users to enhance their abilities. The hologram paused. You, Spawn, feed on negative emotion in your own way, drawing power from fear and suffering. A modified resonance chamber might allow you to do so more efficiently, to harvest the ambient emotional energy of Coruscant's population without direct contact. You want me to feed on people's fear? Spawn's voice carried revulsion. To become a parasite? I want you to survive, Jocasta Nu corrected gently. And to continue protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The Empire generates fear naturally, crushes hope and spreads suffering as policy. What I'm suggesting would not create new suffering but merely harness what already exists. The people would not be harmed, would not even know they were contributing to your power. But you would gain the energy needed to continue your war. Spawn turned away, wrestling with the suggestion, the necroplasm roiling with his internal conflict. Everything she said made logical sense. He would not be creating the suffering, merely using it, turning the Empire's own cruelty against itself. But it felt too close to the deals he had rejected before, the compromises that led down roads paved with good intentions and ending in damnation. There's another option, Jocasta Nu continued, riskier, but potentially more powerful. Deep beneath this temple, in vaults even I cannot access remotely, the ancient Jedi stored artifacts they deemed too dangerous for use but too significant to destroy. Among them is something called the Crucible of Souls, a Sith device from the era before the Rule of Two. It was designed to consume the life force of victims and transfer it to the wielder, granting immense but temporary power. That's Sith magic, Kira protested. Using it would make you like them, wouldn't it? Perhaps, the holocron admitted. Or perhaps not. The Crucible does not corrupt its user directly, does not pull them toward the dark side. It is merely a tool, and tools are defined by their use. In the hands of a Sith, it enabled atrocity. In Spawn's hands, it might enable salvation. Spawn looked back at the hologram, at the ancient librarian who had preserved knowledge across impossible years. Why are you helping me? Why not just let me burn out and disappear? Jocasta Nu smiled, sad and weary. Because you remind me of what the Jedi should have been. Protectors, guardians, individuals who fought for others without seeking power or glory. We lost our way in the final years, became too entangled in politics, too certain of our own righteousness. And that blindness allowed the Sith to destroy us. She gestured to the temple around them. I preserved this knowledge hoping someone worthy would eventually find it. Someone who understood that power without purpose is merely destruction. You may not be Jedi, Spawn, but you embody their ideals more truly than many who wore the title. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and Spawn felt something shift within him. Not acceptance, but perhaps understanding. He had spent so long defining himself by what he had lost, by his damnation and his rage, that he had forgotten there might be purpose beyond mere vengeance, meaning beyond personal suffering. Show me this vault, he said finally. Let me see these artifacts, and then I'll decide what kind of monster I'm willing to become to protect these people. Jocasta Nu's image flickered, expressing something that might have been approval or might have been sorrow. Follow the main corridor to the eastern wall. You will find a door sealed by mechanisms only Force users could open. Your power is different, but it is power nonetheless. I believe it will respond to your will if you focus properly. She began to fade, her form growing translucent. And Spawn, whatever you choose, remember that damnation is not a state but a process. You are not defined by what you were or what you have become, but by what you choose to do with the power you possess. The Jedi understood this, eventually. I hope you will as well. The hologram vanished, leaving only the softly pulsing holocron behind, and Spawn and Kira were alone in the ancient temple with its whispered secrets and waiting darkness. They found the vault exactly where Jocasta Nu had indicated, a section of wall that seemed solid until examined closely, then revealed itself as a door of such precise construction that its seams were nearly invisible. Symbols covered its surface, warnings in a dozen dead languages, but the meaning was clear enough. What lay beyond was dangerous, forbidden, not meant for mortal hands. Spawn placed his hand against the door, and the necroplasm reached out, seeking the mechanisms that controlled it. He felt resistance, layers of protection designed to repel intrusion, but he was not trying to force entry so much as ask permission. The temple had stood here for millennia, waiting, and perhaps it recognized in him something worth responding to. The door shuddered, then swung inward, revealing a chamber lit by crystals that glowed with their own internal light. Shelves lined the walls, each holding artifacts of power and danger, objects the Jedi had deemed too significant to destroy but too perilous to use. Holocrons of Sith lords, blades forged in dark side rituals, masks that granted visions of the future at the cost of sanity. And at the chamber's center, on a pedestal wrapped in chains of pure force-forged energy, the crucible of souls. It was smaller than Spawn expected, a sphere perhaps 30 centimeters in diameter, made of metal that seemed to shift between silver and crimson depending on the angle of observation. Symbols covered its surface, writhing and changing, never quite resolving into comprehensible shapes. And from within it came a sound, barely audible, like the whispers of countless voices begging for release or offering damnation. "That thing feels wrong," Kirasin said, staying near the entrance. "Like it's aware, hungry, waiting for someone to be foolish enough to use it." "It is all those things," Spawn agreed, approaching slowly. The necroplasm recoiled from the crucible, sensing something kindred but fundamentally opposed, power of a different flavor but similar appetite. It's designed to consume life and transform it into energy. The Sith who created it probably used it to fuel their rituals, sacrificing slaves and enemies to power their darkest works. "And you're considering using it?" "I'm considering whether using it would make me worse than I already am." Spawn reached out, not quite touching the device, letting his hand hover above its surface. "I'm already damned, already a creature sustained by death and suffering. Maybe this is just honest about what I am, acknowledging the monster instead of pretending otherwise. Or maybe it's a line you don't cross," Kirasin countered, her voice urgent. "You've fought to protect people, to use your power for something other than destruction. Using that thing, feeding on souls, that's different. That's becoming what you've fought against." Spawn stood there, hand extended, frozen between choice and consequence, and thought about all the paths that had led him to this moment. Every decision that had shaped him, every compromise, and every stand on principle. Mela Bolgia had offered him power in exchange for service, and he had broken that deal, chosen rebellion over slavery. The necroplasm gave him abilities beyond human limits, but he had directed those abilities toward protection rather than conquest. But now, trapped in an alien galaxy with depleting power and an empire that would not stop until he was destroyed or captured, he faced a choice that had no clear right answer. Use the crucible and gain the strength to continue fighting, or refuse it and watch helplessly as the people he had sworn to protect suffered under renewed imperial oppression. The voices within the crucible whispered promises and threats in languages he somehow understood, offered power beyond measure, showed him visions of what he could accomplish with unlimited energy. He could burn the empire to ash, could scour every world of corruption and cruelty, could remake the galaxy in an image of justice enforced by absolute power. And in those visions, he saw himself becoming everything he hated, a tyrant convinced of his own righteousness, drunk on power and certain that the ends justified any means. He pulled his hand back. "No," he said, and his voice was quiet but absolute. "I've walked that road before, believed that more power would let me do more good. It never does. Power just amplifies what you already are, and I'm already too close to the edge. Using this would push me over, make me something that destroys rather than protects." Relief flooded Kirasin's features. "Then we find another way. The resonance chamber thing, maybe, or just better tactics, smarter fights. But not this. Never this." Spawn nodded, turning away from the crucible, but as he did, alarms began to blare throughout the temple. Not mechanical sirens, but something deeper, a vibration in the force itself that made the walls shudder and the ancient crystals dim. And from above came the sound of explosions, of buildings collapsing, of an assault too large to be anything but the Empire's full might unleashed. They found us, Kirasin breathed, horror dawning. They tracked us here, waited until we were trapped underground, and now they're bringing the whole sector down on top of us. Spawn's eyes blazed brighter. Then we don't have time for careful consideration anymore. We fight our way out, and we do it now. He looked back at the crucible one last time, at the power he had rejected, and felt certainty settle over him like a shroud. Sometimes the only way to win is to refuse the easy answer. Sometimes you have to fight with what you have, and trust that it's enough. They ran through the temple, the holocron of Jocasta Nu clutched in Kirasin's pack, racing against the collapse that pursued them. Behind them, the vault's door sealed itself once more, the crucible returning to its patient waiting. And above, Darth Vader stood among the ruins of what had been an entire subsector, watching as his troops drove shaped charges into the ground, creating a controlled collapse that would bury the temple forever. "The creature is trapped," an officer reported. Seismic sensors detect 2 life signs in the temple structure, no other exits available. They either suffocate when the air pockets collapse, or they attempt to fight through our lines and we capture them in the open. Vader said nothing, merely watched as his plan unfolded with mechanical precision. The Emperor wanted the creature studied, but Vader had concluded that some anomalies were too dangerous to preserve. Better to destroy it here, bury it under 1,000,000 tons of rubble and duracret, and report that unfortunately the target had chosen death over capture. The galaxy would be safer for it. And if a small part of him, the part that still remembered being a slave boy who dreamed of freeing the oppressed, whispered that he was killing something noble, something that fought for the right reasons, well, that part had no voice anymore. That part had died on Mustafar, along with Anakin Skywalker. The final charges detonated, and an entire section of Coruscant's underlevels collapsed inward, buildings and streets and the accumulated detritus of millennia falling into the void. Dust rose in massive clouds, blotting out the already dim light, and when it finally settled, there was only silence and the absence where a temple had stood for 5,000 years. "Confirm the kill," Vader commanded, and sensor teams moved forward, scanning the rubble for life signs, for any indication that the creature called Spawn had survived. But as they searched, something stirred in the darkness beneath the ruins. The necroplasm had felt the collapse coming, had wrapped itself around Spawn and Kirasin in a protective cocoon stronger than any armor, and when the world fell, they endured, buried under impossible weight, in darkness absolute and silence complete. Spawn drew upon the last reserves of his power and began to dig. The necroplasm extended like living hands, pushing rubble aside, creating a tunnel through the debris, moving upward with slow but inexorable progress. Each meter cost energy he could barely afford, each ton shifted, bringing him closer to the edge of depletion, but he did not stop, could not stop, because Kirasin was with him, and she would die if he failed. And he had promised himself that he would protect those who stood beside him. Hours passed, or perhaps days, time losing meaning in the crushing dark. The air grew thin, stale, poisonous with dust and the off-gassing of pulverized materials. Kirasin's breathing grew labored, and Spawn knew they were running out of time. But still he pushed upward, driven by will more than energy now, by the simple refusal to surrender that had defined his entire cursed existence. And finally, impossibly, his hand broke through into open air. Not the surface, but some pocket of space within the ruins, some chance configuration of fallen debris that had created a chamber large enough to breathe. He pulled Kirasin through, felt her gasp and cough as her lungs found oxygen again, and allowed himself a moment of exhaustion, of relief that she had survived. "Are we?" Kirasin could barely speak, her throat raw from the dust. "Are we out?" "Not yet," Spawn replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The necroplasm dimmed almost to extinction. But we're alive. For now, that's enough. They rested in the darkness, gathering strength, and above them, Darth Vader ordered his forces to withdraw, satisfied that the anomaly had been eliminated. He did not know that in refusing the Crucible's power, Spawn had chosen a different path, one that would lead to confrontation not as conqueror and conquered, but as ideologies opposed. The war was not over, it had merely entered a new phase. And in the ruins of the Temple of the Wills, Spawn made a silent vow that he would survive, would emerge from this burial, and would show the Empire what it truly meant to fight something that refused to die, refused to break, refused to abandon the innocent, no matter the cost. Damnation had made him a monster. Choice would make him a legend.